This story deals with childhood trauma, school bullying, and conflict between relatives. The protagonist grew up without a mother's affection. She constantly told him it would be better if he just vanished. Even so, Ryu still loved his mother. Eventually, she abandoned him. He was completely crushed, but then he got hit by a truck. And since we already know how that ends, we also know where he ended up. He died and was reincarnated inside a game, the only game he truly enjoyed. To make matters worse, he woke up in the body of a cowardly side character. That character acted so fearful because he possessed a skill called evasion. Nobody chose this character in the game because he refused to fight and only dodged every attack, which made everyone label him a coward. And if that was not bad enough, he was destined to be killed by the rabbit girl. Since he had reincarnated before the game's events began, he decided to change his fate and uncover the identity of the god who placed him inside the game. The story is really good, guys, and I hope you enjoy it. Real supporters from the basement, leave a like and a comment. Comment part 2. I notice many of you are not receiving notifications, so turn on the bell so you do not miss any videos. The story begins on a sunny day at school. It was the rabbit girl's first day of class. Her cheeks were bright red as she nervously introduced herself. Ryu knew she had the potential to destroy the world, yet she still looked like an adorable child. He found himself fascinated by her long ears. Shyly, the girl introduced herself as Ravena. Her hobbies were reading and listening to music. She also enjoyed watching Korean dramas. At that moment, Ryu began remembering everything this girl had done in the game's story. She hated the world and would eventually destroy everything. Her hatred was so overwhelming that she truly brought ruin and catastrophe. But right now, she looked harmless and cute while asking her classmates to take care of her. Remembering everything Ravena would become, he was terrified. In other words, guys, he was completely doomed. The game was called Brave Hearts, and he used to play it in his previous life. It was an RPG whose protagonist was a boy named Kang. In the game's story, the world had rebuilt itself after a catastrophe that happened around 200 years earlier. Hunters existed to eliminate monsters, and both magic and technology had advanced greatly. However, the game was extremely complex because it contained around 44 different endings, and only one of them was good. Since he had reincarnated as a weak side character, he would need to work even harder. This character was an irritating coward who ran away from every fight. To make things worse, he suffered bullying from both his classmates and his relatives. The original Ryu was practically useless, and that was the body our protagonist had inherited. The boy stared in disbelief, and when he opened his eyes, he noticed the girl who would become one of the most dangerous villains. No matter what he did, a tragic ending awaited him. Someone suddenly said it was Ryu's turn. He turned around and looked at the rabbit girl. Ravena seemed like someone carrying all the suffering in the world. After she was born, her parents abandoned her, and everyone mocked her because of her ears. People had always treated her like trash. All of it happened because of a mana disaster that caused her to be born with mutated DNA. She was what people called an AIM. Ryu had heard that this condition was inherited genetically from the parents. That made it even more cruel that she had been abandoned. Now he finally understood why Ravena became the Witch of Calamity. Because of that, he became determined to change the future and save her. Someone tapped his shoulder, and it was the teacher asking where he wanted to sit. Since he intended to change Ravena's fate, he walked over to her. He knew his actions could alter everything, especially because he did not want to die at the hands of the Witch of Calamity. As he approached her, Ravena's eyes sparkled while she asked who he was. Ryu smiled and asked if he could sit beside her. Since the girl had been rejected ever since childhood, she could not understand his behavior. There were still 5 years left before the game's real story would begin, so he needed to become friends with her as soon as possible, even before they entered the academy. But that would not be easy. After guiding her onto the right path, he planned to turn them into allies. He pulled over a desk and sat beside her. It was hard to imagine that such a cute little girl would one day become the witch capable of destroying the world. While sitting there, he kept staring at her and wondered how he should approach her. Ravena became embarrassed and even asked him to stop staring at her. The boy felt a little down because he was terrible at hiding his thoughts. He wanted to stop wasting time and invite her to his house already. But at that moment, he became distracted by her tail and even shouted when she suddenly called his name. He thought she had caught him staring at her tail, but he quickly covered it up by asking what she wanted. Shyly, the rabbit girl asked why he had chosen to sit beside her. Ryu simply replied that he wanted to be her friend. Ravena looked confused and instantly turned redder than a tomato. He asked why she was reacting that way. She could not understand why he would want to be friends with her, especially since she was an AIM. And to make matters worse, he belonged to the famous family of swordsmen, known as the Das family. In other words, guys, she was suspicious of him. That was because Ravena had always been mistreated, so he ended up mentioning Lilika's name. He explained that Lilika was his pet bunny and looked a lot like her. That was why he had become interested in Ravena. The girl immediately got irritated. She said she was not a rabbit but a human, then stormed off with a pout on her face. He stayed behind, apologizing to her, but before leaving, she stopped at the classroom door and shyly said she hoped to see him again tomorrow. Then Ravena ran away in embarrassment. Ryu thought that at least she did not seem truly angry with him. After that, the boy returned home. It still had not fully sunk in that he was now inside the world of his favorite game. He even wondered whether this world had status windows just like the game. He looked around to make sure nobody was watching, then stretched out his hand and summoned his information screen. The player's status window appeared, and he realized he was not actually weak. When he checked the stats, he was genuinely shocked. Ryu's abilities were far better than he remembered. That made no sense because this character had been a pathetic coward in the game. He was bullied even by the students at the dojo. Because of that, he swore he would change his fate. In his previous life, he had also been rejected, though for entirely different reasons that would be revealed later. Back then, the kid suffered a lot, guys. Honestly, he may have had it even worse than Subaru from Subaru Natsuki. When he arrived home, he realized he now belonged to a noble family. He told his mother he was back, and she asked how school had gone. The moment Ryu realized he finally had a mother, he ran over and hugged her tightly. The woman even asked what kind of life he had lived before. He had been rejected by everyone, including his own mother. So simply having this woman as his mother already meant everything to him. Naturally, she became worried and asked why tears were forming in his eyes. He replied that it was nothing, and said he needed to get ready for swordsmanship training. From now on, he intended to truly live as Ryu. And the thing he needed most was to master the Beast King style. That technique was incredibly powerful, and the original character was supposed to learn it much later. He already knew this character's potential, because he had once placed him in the protagonist's party while playing the game. When he entered his room, he saw the bunny Lilica. He thought she looked adorable. He already knew the rabbit well because after reincarnating into this body, he had inherited all of Ryu's memories. While holding the bunny, he commented that she really did resemble Ravana, but his main concern right now was mastering the Beast King technique. When he arrived at the Swordsman Academy, he noticed there were not many students because he had come early. The Dawson family was one of the most powerful families in the country and even owned its own academy. As soon as he arrived, the other students who were also his relatives were staring at a girl, and our protagonist quickly recognized her. It was Seiko, one of the story's most important characters. She was 2 years older than him and also a gifted prodigy of the family. In the game, she would eventually become one of the strongest swordswomen after graduating, and later become Ryu's ally since they belonged to the same family. But what confused him was why she was there despite being 2 years ahead of him. He decided not to approach her yet because it was still too soon. His focus was on learning the Beast King technique, so he immediately began preparing himself. Then he started practicing the various forms and combat styles, which were very similar to the breathing techniques from Demon Slayer. After performing several attack forms, he prepared for the next stage. He continued training for nearly the entire afternoon. At one point, he even wondered whether Seiko was secretly watching him train because he wanted to impress her. At the same time, he found himself genuinely enjoying the training. Soon, the relatives who used to bully him started mocking him again. They were triplets and also distant cousins of his. Inside the game, they were known as Cerberus. They were among the cursed children who constantly bullied Ryu. Our hero realized they were talking about him, so he angrily turned around to hear what they were saying. This was the first time he had experienced bullying in this body. But remembering everything that had happened made him furious just from seeing those smug faces. Every moment of bullying Ryu had endured began flashing through his mind. All the humiliation, kicks, and abuse he had suffered resurfaced. That character had been extremely timid, which was why others took advantage of him. But now our hero was the one inside Ryu's body. He kept telling himself that he would never allow this to happen again. Then he loudly provoked his cousins. The other students heard the insults and were shocked. Without warning, Ryu assumed the charging stance of the second form. Then he launched a swift attack at one of his cousins. The boy was sent flying, and his brother immediately asked if he was alright. Ryu, filled with confidence, asked if the three of them were scared. One of the boys asked what had happened to his cousin because he seemed completely different. Ryu simply told them to get ready, grab their swords, and fight him. Bullies are always like that, guys. They only act brave when their target does nothing back. The three of them even admitted that Ryu had completely changed, as if he carried a much heavier presence now. He shouted once more, telling the three cowards to stand up, or they would get beaten even worse. The more he remembered the humiliation he had suffered, the angrier he became. Then he started yelling, asking if the three of them had gotten so scared they nearly wet themselves. They responded by asking whether Ryu even understood who he was dealing with. Ryu knew perfectly well that his cousin Shung was the one who ordered the triplets to harass him. The three brothers wondered how Ryu had figured that out. The siblings dreamed of becoming hunters, but their father could not afford the academy tuition. Because of that, the Ozan family sponsored them so they could pursue that path, and the one responsible for supporting them was Shung himself. He only agreed to sponsor the triplets if they kept bullying Ryu. That was why our hero had suffered all those years. Now he confronted them, saying he knew everything, and reminding them that he was also a member of the Ozan family. If he wanted, he could take away their sponsorship immediately. The cowards instantly panicked. At that moment, the swordsmanship dojo master appeared and asked what was happening. Our protagonist answered that the three of them had started the fight. The master asked if that was true. Ryu had fought back because he was not going to stand there and get beaten, and the master questioned the triplets again. The boys froze in fear and quickly decided it was better to agree with Ryu. So they admitted they had caused the whole problem and that Ryu was innocent. The master was shocked because until yesterday, Ryu had been too cowardly to fight anyone. After that, he spent the entire afternoon training. The next day, when he went to school, he felt determined and promised himself he would never let anyone humiliate him again. However, something immediately caught his attention. It was Ravana, looking adorable while sitting at her desk. The boy stood there staring at her. Then he casually walked over and greeted her. Ravana's ears perked up, and her cheeks turned red as she shyly greeted him back. Trying to get closer to her, he asked what she was reading. The girl replied that it was just a random book, and Ryu said he preferred reading web novels. She asked why he had joined the book club if he did not even enjoy books, and he answered that he joined because he wanted to be near her. Hearing that made Ravana blush intensely. "What do you mean? He joined the book club because of me." She admitted that she also liked web novels, but since she had no money, she could only read the free ones. Ryu noticed the mood becoming awkward since she lived in an orphanage and struggled financially. So he changed the subject and asked what kind of dramas she liked watching. Surprised, Ravana asked how he knew about that. He explained that she had mentioned it during her introduction. She hid behind her book in embarrassment, wondering how he could remember something like that. Maybe he genuinely liked her if he still wanted to be friends with her. Or perhaps he simply wanted a friend because he did not have any either. In other words, maybe he was only fascinated by her because she was an aim-mate. At least that was what Ravana believed. She even thought he would eventually lose interest in her and abandon her like everyone else always did. Ryu noticed Ravana's ears drooping and thought they looked incredibly cute, making him want to touch them. Of course, he knew asking something like that would be strange. Then he remembered Lilica and decided to cheer her up by showing her a video. She became excited and asked if that was the pet he had mentioned before. So he played the video and explained that he recorded it the previous night. Laughing softly, she found it really entertaining. She even commented that Lilica was unbelievably adorable. Ryu watched her ears twitch and thought she really did resemble his bunny. Then he asked if she wanted to meet the rabbit in person, and she happily agreed. After that, he invited Ravana to visit his house after school. Blushing nervously, she tried thinking of an excuse to refuse. She did not want to relive those painful experiences again, but in the end, she could not resist and accepted the invitation. When she arrived there, she was amazed because his house looked like something straight out of a drama series. The boy's mother appeared and immediately asked if she was Ravana, the friend her son had invited, then warmly welcomed her inside. Ravana had expected to be mistreated because of her genetic mutation. She remembered parents warning their children not to play with her since people looked down on anyone with mutations. But Ryu's mother treated her kindly and made her feel welcome. Her warmth and friendliness were so overwhelming that Ravana almost felt blinded by it. At that moment, Ryu grabbed the girl's hand and pulled her along, telling her to follow him. She was enjoying herself, yet she still worried he would eventually lose interest in her. Even so, she told herself she never wanted to let go of his hand again. After entering the house, she was completely fascinated. The girl tasted delicious food and spent time playing with Lilica. It became one of the happiest days she had ever experienced. Eventually, nighttime arrived. Our protagonist's father returned home from work. The family commented that he was late for dinner, and he awkwardly apologized because he had promised to arrive earlier so they could eat together. His youngest daughter was pouting, saying she wanted to play with the bunny girl, but Ravana had already gone home before she returned from school. Our hero explained that Ravana was his friend and had come over to visit. That was why his little sister was sulking. Ryu then called out to his father and asked if they could train together after dinner. The man became excited and said he could not wait to practice with his son. Ryu wanted to see how much he had improved from his academy training. However, he was not interested in simple practice. He wanted a real fight. His father even asked if he was serious, and with complete determination, Ryu replied that he was because he wanted to kill real monsters someday. The scene then shifted to later that night. They were inside the dojo at home when his father asked why he had suddenly become so interested in growing stronger. In 5 years, he would enter the main branch of the Zon family swordsmanship academy. The game's original protagonist Kong would eventually solve countless crises, and Ryu did not want to fall behind. On top of that, his cousin would become an incredibly powerful figure, and even that annoying cousin of his would gain major recognition. In short, guys, he refused to be left behind. The boy's father sensed that something had happened and even asked if someone had been bothering him at the academy. That was because he had heard his son got into a fight during training, and that another student ended up injured. However, his son claimed he had done nothing wrong. The father waited for Ryu to explain his side of the story. Meanwhile, our protagonist could not tell whether his father genuinely wanted to listen or was preparing to scold him. Still, he explained that since childhood, he had been taught the family's divine swordsmanship existed to protect people. Those words had stayed deeply engraved in his heart. However, he admitted that this time he had not fought to protect others but to defend his own dignity, because in his past life, he had endured everything in silence. The boy said that if he could not even protect himself, then he would never be able to protect anyone else. His father asked if that was why he stood up to the bully. Filled with determination, he answered yes, but he also said he wanted more than self-defense. He wanted the strength to protect the weak as well. And to achieve that, he wished to train against real monsters. Ryu's father smiled and gently patted his son's head, saying his reasoning made perfect sense. He even mentioned how much his son had changed in such a short time. Excited, Ryu asked whether his father would help him, and the man agreed, though he had one condition. Curious, Ryu asked what it was. He needed to prove he was strong enough to face a real monster. Because of that, he would have to spar against his own father. But there was a restriction. His father would only be allowed to take 5 steps and would not use mana. That was also to avoid making the challenge impossible for his son. Guys, still, what Ryu truly wanted was to learn the Beast King style. His father replied that he would demonstrate the basics later on. Under those conditions, Ryu believed he had a chance to land at least one hit with the wooden sword on his father's shoulder. The boy stood there thinking seriously. Then he declared it was time to begin the test. Ryu charged forward, but his father blocked the attack effortlessly. The boy pushed off the ground and leaped in for another strike, yet his father stopped it even more easily. So he began searching for openings, and with a smile his father commented that it would not work. However, Ryu managed to find the perfect gap, forcing his father to step backward. Even that alone was already extremely impressive, guys. At that moment, he realized he still had a small chance, pressuring his father further, and the man proudly admitted he was impressed by his son. But then his father noticed he had lowered his guard and suddenly took a hit to the ribs. And it was not a weak strike either. It was a surprisingly powerful blow. The boy immediately jumped backward to create distance. His father could not believe that a single moment of carelessness had been enough for his son to land a hit. Exhausted, Ryu asked if his father finally acknowledged his abilities, and it seemed he did, though in the most painful way possible. Because of that, he agreed to help train the boy. Then, over the weekend, Ryu's father decided to take him monster hunting for training. Naturally, his mother became extremely worried, while his little sister begged to come along too. Still, they reassured her that everything would be fine. His mother warned them not to overdo the training, and then they prepared for the trip to the family academy. According to the game's story, the world had become dangerously unstable. Everything started after the Calamity Shift, which heavily affected the entire planet. Following that event, monsters from other dimensions began appearing, essentially turning Earth into one giant dungeon. Portals opened across the world with creatures pouring out from them. If those portals were not dealt with in time, the world itself would collapse and become permanently connected to another dimension. In other words, monsters from countless dimensions would invade the planet. If humanity failed to conquer the portals quickly, Earth would be destroyed by those creatures. That was exactly why the game had more than 40 bad endings and only one good ending. The boy's father explained that they first needed to retrieve a key. Ryu asked where the key was located. His father answered that it was stored in the warehouse. Whenever someone cleared one of those portals, they received a key that allowed them to re-enter it later. It seemed that the game system still existed in this world. After arriving at the family headquarters, the boy's father showed him his workplace. Their family owned dozens of branches spread throughout the country. To enter dungeons and portals, people needed a government-issued license, essentially a hunter certification. Since Ryu was not officially a hunter yet, he could only enter alongside his father, and everyone there greeted the man respectfully. That was because our protagonist's father was the branch manager. At that moment, someone suddenly approached and surprised the boy. It was a female employee saying the boss's son was adorable, while everyone around started praising him too. Some of them even pinched his cheeks and commented on how soft they were. Ryu wondered if all hunters acted this strangely. One of the receptionists announced that room 2 was prepared just as the manager had requested. The boy's father called him over, and Ryu asked what kind of key they were using. It was a white rank key. The portal difficulty levels were divided into 7 different colors, starting with white as the easiest, followed by gray, yellow, green, red, and blue. And finally, there was the most dangerous one of all, the black key. The boy's father explained that even the white rank key would already be a major challenge for him. But Ryu was feeling overly confident, almost like a superhero. His confidence was so high that he already wanted to start with a gray rank dungeon. However, his father understood his limits and told him to enter the white rank portal first. After arriving there, his father explained how dungeons worked. Ryu was amazed because his family was wealthy enough to own private portals. The man then called his son over and warned him to be extremely careful inside a dungeon since the only way out was by completely clearing it. The boy understood the responsibility and told his father he was ready. His father still looked worried, but he trusted his son's potential. Ryu even joked that if he failed to clear the dungeon, his father could always step in by using the key on the portal. His father agreed, saying otherwise his mother would be furious for putting the boy in danger. Once the portal activated, a bright light filled the area and they passed through it into a crystal-filled cavern. That was what the inside of the portal looked like. A notification window appeared, informing him that he had entered a white rank cave. The mission required defeating 15 goblins, and he immediately assumed it would be easy. So he tossed his backpack aside and drew his sword. He knew it would be dangerous, so he planned to stay cautious. It would not be simple, but it should not be impossible either. That was what he thought. Then something suddenly caught his attention. His father had already captured all 15 goblins in less than 30 seconds. Ryu even asked if he had already caught every single one, and his father confirmed it while pointing with his sword. Now his son could defeat them one at a time for training. Although he felt nervous, he confidently told his father he was ready. So his father began releasing the goblins one by one. The freed monster immediately rushed toward the boy, while Ryu tightened his grip on the sword and prepared himself carefully. The boy possessed deep knowledge of the game and also belonged to the Dazen family's divine swordsmanship tradition. Because of that, defeating these monsters should have been easy for him. The goblin suddenly grabbed one of the crystals to use as a weapon. Ryu had not expected that, guys, but then he lowered his stance and released his aura. This technique was called piercing stance. He prepared a finishing strike against the goblin and it worked perfectly, sending the monster crashing to the ground. He had not expected it to be that easy. His father let out a relieved sigh, though there were still 15 goblins remaining. Ryu turned toward him and proudly declared that one was already down. Since game Ryu had belonged to Kang's main party, he carried a unique restriction. The game had a special system called gifts, passive abilities that reflected each character's personality. Because Ryu was considered a coward, his gift was evasion instinct. At first glance, that ability seemed incredibly useful. His father prepared to release another goblin and cut the rope holding it. Evasion instinct automatically moved the user away from attacks that could become fatal. Basically, during the game, the character never attacked because he always prioritized defense. That was why players rejected the character and refused to use him. Some people even claimed the character should be removed from the game because he was so useless. Our protagonist rarely played with that character, but one day he decided to give him a chance. Once the ability awakened, the character gained complete control over the evasion gift. Shouting loudly, he declared that he would improve this power and become unbeatable. Characters who awakened grew stronger over time within the game. Instead of dodging, he tried blocking the next attack and ended up getting thrown backward. There were now 2 monsters standing before him. Because of that, Ryu needed to use these battles to awaken his gift. Combat had seemed much easier inside the game than in real life, but he still believed awakening his power would not be impossible. So he charged forward and pushed himself to the limit. The scene shifted to several minutes later. By then he had already defeated multiple goblins. His father told him to rest for a while and even joked that his son was performing surprisingly well. However, the boy now wanted his father to release 4 goblins at the same time, so his father accepted the request. The moment it happened, Ryu immediately regretted it because even fighting 2 had already been difficult enough. The goblins were using distraction tactics. Suddenly he sensed danger approaching from behind, and his evasion ability activated. Without thinking, his body dodged automatically, causing the crystal thrown by the goblin to barely graze his cheek before smashing into the nearby crystals. At that moment, he realized he would have died without that ability. Because of evasion instinct, his body had moved on its own. He understood that he needed to trust that skill more. While training his gift, he continued eliminating monsters. After focusing carefully, he located the goblins and managed to slash one across the leg. He became slightly more confident because he knew the evasion instinct would support him. When another goblin threw an object at him, he dodged effortlessly, leaving the little monster furious. He planted his foot firmly on the ground and leaped toward the creature. Then he sliced the goblin cleanly in half. However, below him, 2 more monsters were already preparing to throw crystals at him. Ryu took a deep breath and activated a sword technique, causing electricity to surge through his blade. It was a swordsmanship skill that demanded intense mana concentration. Then he unleashed the lion-crushing slash and cut down the remaining 3 goblins at once. Right after that, he dropped to the ground and realized only 1 enemy remained, so he immediately rushed toward it. His father appeared and told him to stop charging recklessly and calm down because there was not only 1 goblin left. Several more were still tied up. That was when he realized clearing the dungeon would take much longer than expected. Later on, his father carefully observed everything because the boy had successfully defeated all 15 goblins. Ryu's father told himself that he should have trusted his son from the beginning. Then he called out to Ryu. At that moment, a notification appeared announcing that the portal had been cleared. A bright light shined across the sky, and a key formed before flying directly into Ryu's hand. The boy realized he had conquered the portal and obtained the white rank key. Even so, he still looked dissatisfied. His father patted him on the back and asked why he was upset after successfully clearing the portal. Ryu called out to his father and admitted he was frustrated because he was not satisfied with only clearing a white rank portal. He wanted something greater. What he truly desired was to become much stronger, but if he kept fighting weak monsters, it would take too long. Now that the portal had been cleared, there were no monsters left to defeat there. Because of that, he quietly wondered if he should ask his father to let him challenge another portal. He still had not awakened his gift, meaning he could not fully control his evasion ability. The boy's father kept talking about how shocked he was that Ryu had defeated 4 monsters at once, even grabbing and shaking him proudly while saying the boy clearly took after him. Then the father announced it was time to leave, which immediately surprised Ryu. The exit had already opened, and his father asked him to hand over the key. However, he still wanted to keep training. Feeling slightly awkward, he asked his father if there were any other portals available for practice. He even tried persuading him by saying he felt close to awakening his gift. Ryu believed that fighting inside a more difficult portal might finally trigger his ability. He even confidently claimed he could handle rank 2 monsters, but his father warned that if the boy got hurt, his mother would blame him for it. Still, our protagonist was persuasive enough to convince him in the end. The man admitted he would trust his son because he had already seen his potential. Smiling brightly, Ryu thanked his father sincerely. "Listen, kid, if you put yourself in danger, I'll step in and save you immediately." After that, they headed toward portal number 3. It was still a white rank portal, but completely different from the previous one. His father explained that not all white rank portals were the same. As an extra precaution, he had also brought along another hunter from the company who specialized in healing. Just seeing his father bring support made the boy realize this portal was far more dangerous than the last one. Once the key activated the entrance, they stepped inside excitedly, but the moment Ryu entered, he immediately noticed the place felt different. A notification appeared telling him to eliminate the monsters, yet he could not see any creatures at all. At least that was what he thought. The monsters were actually there because he nearly got hit by one of them. He only avoided the attack thanks to his ability, and immediately froze in shock since he had no idea where the strike came from. Another notification warned him that multiple monsters surrounded him, and only after several seconds did he finally identify their locations. At that point, he became genuinely terrified, guys. Only then did he understand that he was nowhere near capable of clearing a gray rank portal. His fear became so intense that his body nearly froze in place. Above him, his father stood beside the healer, and the older man asked whether he was truly certain his son could handle this. Our protagonist's father stayed silent and simply continued watching him. His son had changed drastically in such a short time because only days earlier he had been a complete coward frightened by everything. But about a week ago he suddenly became different, far more serious than before. It was almost as if his son had undergone a positive transformation. He knew very well that Ryu had always possessed a kind heart, which often made him an easy target for ridicule. Because he struggled within the brutal competition of the Zan family, his cousins constantly bullied him. The father still remembered how happily the boy smiled when he received his first sword. Back then, it made him think his son was too gentle to become a hunter. However, he now realized the boy truly had changed, though perhaps not completely. He even remembered hearing that Ryu had made a new friend at school, a girl with rabbit ears, and maybe she was the reason behind this sudden transformation. And after all, boys often try to impress girls. Even the master of the Swordsmanship Academy had mentioned that his son had changed and had even started fighting back against bullies. But Ryu's father became upset at the claim, insisting his son would never attack people because he was naturally peaceful. Scratching his head awkwardly, the master admitted that perhaps Ryu had not revealed the entire truth. Of course, our protagonist's father immediately defended him, saying his son would never hurt someone without a reason. And if he really had fought a bully, then there must have been a good explanation. He already knew his son had been suffering from bullying, and the thought angered him. He even demanded to know why the master never informed him sooner and questioned whether someone had ordered him to stay silent. The man became nervous, clearly hiding the fact that Ryu had been bullied at the dojo. At that moment, the father felt guilty, believing he lacked enough influence within the family. That was why the master chose to obey other family members instead. Then he called Seong's father, only for the man to mockingly say that Seong bullied Ryu simply because Ryu was weak and cowardly. But our protagonist's father declared he would no longer tolerate it. And it was on that exact day that our protagonist approached his father and requested a real sparring match. That was when the father realized his son genuinely wanted to change, which was why the situation shocked him so much. He had been completely caught off guard. But soon after, he smiled because his son no longer wanted to remain weak and cowardly. When the boy managed to clear that first white rank portal, he became genuinely happy since Ryu performed far better than expected. In other words, the father was extremely proud. Anyone would have been. However, once they entered a stronger white rank portal, he noticed Ryu acting cowardly again. The boy was not only trembling in fear, he was actively running from the monsters. At that moment, he was struck in the arm, and his father realized the boy was putting himself in danger. The fear in his eyes was obvious. The healer asked the father how long he intended to keep watching without stepping in. Then Ryu stopped because he had been surrounded and called the goblins toward him. His father understood that interfering now would only disappoint the boy, so the only thing he requested was for the support hunter to place a protective magic shield around Ryu. At the same time, he remained ready to intervene with his own technique if the boy truly faced danger. However, something caught his attention. Ryu's movements looked unnaturally stiff because of how tense he was. Yet his eyes did not belong to someone consumed entirely by fear. The boy planted his foot firmly on the ground, and his father became shocked because he recognized the Beast King-style fourth form, Lion Needle Barrage. Right after using it, Ryu started running away again, but all of it was part of his strategy. When a goblin prepared to fire an arrow, he completely trusted his evasion ability and successfully dodged the shot. He understood that standing still meant certain death because the monsters would surround him. The goblin attacked again, and he dodged once more. He pushed off the ground with all his strength just to avoid the attacks. Still, fear slowly returned again, guys. One monster leaped toward him, and he killed it while deliberately trying not to rely on evasion. He knew that if he depended on dodging constantly, he would never land any attacks himself. When he realized he had briefly controlled the ability, he became surprised. However, a goblin mage above him suddenly struck his arm. He could not understand what was happening. It felt like more and more monsters kept appearing. Little by little, he became completely surrounded. He had not even noticed it happening. One mistake would definitely get him killed. He looked behind himself and realized there was nowhere left to run. At that moment, he was cornered with no escape route. That was the price of resisting his evasion gift. He even started losing control. Convinced he was about to die, his arm throbbed painfully, and just like in his previous life, he knew he could not keep lowering his head and accepting everything. He wanted to become Kang's companion and clear the game successfully. He could have reincarnated as the protagonist instead of ending up as this pathetic crybaby. Just like in his former life, he stood there crying helplessly. He looked at his own reflection and realized he was becoming the very thing he hated most. So he asked himself how much longer he planned to remain this pathetic boy. In his previous life, he had accomplished absolutely nothing. That was exactly why he refused to live as a coward again. He clenched his fists tightly and declared that he could not give up. He refused to die like that, so he slammed his foot hard against the ground. A status window appeared behind him as he prepared to unleash the Dragon Kingdom technique. The pressure from the attack alone was so intense that the goblins became frightened before he even released it. Then he began moving freely through the monsters. The goblin mage laughed confidently, believing he could strike Ryu directly. But Ryu dodged the attack and countered with his sword. He felt happy because his technique was finally working. From above, the boy's father realized that his son had overcome his fear. Even the support hunter asked what had happened because Ryu's attitude changed instantly. In a serious tone, the father simply replied that the boy was his son. The man even asked whether every member of the Ozan family was like that. But the father admitted he was not sure. It looked as though Ryu could predict every incoming attack. He stood there stunned, trying to understand what his son was doing. Eventually, he concluded that this was the gift. Ryu could foresee attacks. On top of that, the boy's determination was truly unbelievable. At that moment, they realized he was using a supreme technique. It was not fully perfected yet, but it was clearly the Beast King style. First form, Lion Crushing Slash. A blue flash burst from the attack, leaving the boy's father unable to understand how his son had managed to perform it. Indeed, the support hunter asked whether the boy was capable of using divine swordsmanship. Breaking into a cold sweat, the father thought to himself that he had never even taught Ryu the technique, yet the boy had already mastered it. It truly seemed that he was a prodigy. Right afterward, he became worried and wondered when exactly his son had awakened such power. Then a notification appeared announcing that the portal had been cleared. The monsters were defeated, and Ryu collapsed to the ground from exhaustion. He was so tired that he could barely move. The notification stated that his physical strength stat had increased by 1 point. This world functioned exactly like the game, where he could level up. He could grow stronger through either training or studying. However, improving through training was far more difficult. That was what he kept telling himself. In the game, players could transfer their progress to a new save file, but that was impossible in this world. In other words, the only way for him to grow stronger now was through training. The boy's father walked over and asked whether Ryu was still alive since he was not moving at all. The boy laughed and admitted he had pushed himself so hard that he could barely move his body. Still, that reaction was expected because he had fought for such a long time. His father also mentioned that the boy had used the Blue Thunder technique. It was a phenomenon tied to sword techniques and considered a trait of divine swordsmanship. The mana condensation became so intense that it released bolts of energy. Ryu stared in disbelief after hearing that explanation from his father. "I really used that technique?" Proudly smiling, his father confirmed it and praised him. "Looks like your training is paying off, son. You've gotten much stronger." At that moment, the support hunter arrived carrying a sack full of items and explained that the portal had dropped several valuable materials. Magical stones did not appear from portals very often. The man even told Ryu to take one of the stones from the goblin, and when he approached, he realized it was an energy stone. Those stones could be used to increase a person's stats. If he used it, his agility would rise by 1 point. He kept staring at the stone while the support hunter suggested letting the boy use it. Then Ryu's father approached and instructed him to channel his mana into the artifact. He began pouring mana into it, curious about what would happen next. Afterward, they finally left the portal. By Monday, his entire body ached from training. His mother had been furious on Sunday because she told him not to overwork himself. Yet now he showed up at school covered in injuries. Ravana approached him with concern and asked whether he was hurt. He explained that his body was sore because he spent the entire weekend training. Still, he told her not to worry since he had only fought weak monsters. She immediately panicked and asked, "What do you mean you fought monsters? That's way too dangerous for kids our age." But then she remembered that he belonged to the Zan family, which owned magical portals for training. Still worried, she offered him ointments and bandages. However, the boy insisted he was fine. She explained that she always carried medical supplies in her bag, though she did not need them as much anymore. He understood perfectly that she used those bandages because of the bullying she endured. To lighten the mood, she suddenly stuck a bandage on his arm and another on his cheek while saying he looked cute with them. She even explained that it would help him heal faster. Laughing softly, he thanked her and asked if she could remind him to take his medicine. She agreed immediately and even asked if there was anything else she could do to help him recover. She said she would do anything to make him feel better. What a shameless expression. He asked whether she truly meant anything. When she said yes, he asked if he could touch her ears, making the girl scream in surprise. "I am sure you were thinking something else, you shameless girl." She became slightly annoyed and asked what he had just said. He quickly excused himself by claiming it was only a joke. She stood there thinking for a moment before suddenly grabbing his hand and shouting for him to touch her ears quickly. Blushing intensely, she warned him to only pet them gently and not for too long. Then she guided his hand herself, saying she simply wanted to cheer him up. At that moment, he finally touched her ears. He realized they were incredibly soft and fluffy. He honestly thought they felt amazing. He even kept petting them for a while, leaving the girl completely frozen. A moment later, she shouted for him to stop touching them and asked whether he felt better now. Surprisingly, she had actually enjoyed it and even thought it felt strangely comforting. Then she glanced to the side and noticed he really did seem happier, which only made her more embarrassed. At that moment, he admitted it worked and said he already felt better. Then, completely out of nowhere, he asked what she thought about them becoming hunters together someday. She immediately replied that it was impossible because she did not have any money. However, he offered to get her a scholarship since his family was wealthy. She mentioned that he was saying strange things and he answered that he had his reasons. First, she was a demi-human, meaning her physical abilities were naturally stronger than those of ordinary humans. Second, she possessed a large amount of mana. He even claimed her mana was so strong that he could sense it from far away. Feeling shy and curious, she asked whether that was really true, and he nodded confidently. Just imagining herself becoming a hunter someday already made her excited. After all, once she turned 19, she would have to leave the orphanage with nowhere else to go, and finding work would be extremely difficult because she was a demi-human. Still, his proposal sounded reckless because being a hunter was not something just anyone could do. Even he, despite coming from a powerful family, had ended up badly injured just from training. That was why she believed it would be impossible for a weak and fragile girl like herself. But he loudly assured her that she did not need to worry because he would do everything possible to help her. He would never abandon her. The girl immediately started falling for him. He even told her that she should believe in herself because she had real potential. Blushing deeply, she shyly asked whether he truly believed in her. She lowered her head and began thinking quietly. Embarrassed, she then asked whether he would take responsibility for what he said. He answered yes and promised that after finishing school, they would enter the academy together. Since he was still holding her hand, she became even more nervous. She pulled her hand away and reminded him that she could never afford a sword academy, but he insisted that he would arrange a full scholarship for her because his family managed a dojo. At that moment, she asked why he was being so kind to her when she had nothing to offer in return. He replied that there was no special reason, but if she really wanted one, he could say he planned to benefit from her someday. Just by looking at the girl's flushed cheeks, it was easy to imagine what she was thinking. He continued by saying that maybe once she became a famous hunter, he could gain some advantages from knowing her. At that moment, she realized he truly liked her, so she smiled and burst into laughter, calling him a very strange person. Deep down, she felt genuinely grateful to Ryu, and because of that, she agreed to train and become a hunter. He even told her she should study magic. If she had a proper teacher, she would excel because she clearly had talent. After that, they began training seriously. They practiced running and jumping rope together. As a result, he spent much more time with Ravana since she rarely left her home before. He knew that if he wanted to improve in magic, he needed to find that instructor. He needed the Witch of Colors, Hong Iona. She was the game's main elemental magic instructor. He had even asked his father to investigate her whereabouts, but they still had not located her. At that moment, someone appeared and asked what he was talking about. When he turned around, he realized it was his father and jumped in surprise. The man explained that he had knocked on the door earlier, but Ryu never answered. Ryu told him he had been thinking about the witch he requested his father investigate. However, his father revealed that they would contact her very soon. The woman's group had agreed to visit them in about a month. Still, they wanted to evaluate Ryu's skill level first before deciding whether to train him. Laughing awkwardly, our protagonist admitted he had not expected that. He already knew there was a strong chance she would refuse to teach him. But in Ravina's case, rejection would almost be impossible because her magical power was enormous, and the witch would definitely notice it. Then his father told him he had some bad news. May had already begun, and every year the same thing happened. The boy became curious about what his father meant. Every May, the Zan family held a large family gathering. Ryu already understood what that meant, and immediately asked whether Sung would also attend. His father confirmed that he would. Sung was the bully who ordered the triplets to torment him. His father even said it would be fine if the boy chose not to go. But while suggesting that Ryu stay home, the man suddenly became startled and asked what his son was thinking. That was because his son had an intimidating expression, clearly wanting revenge on his cousins. Then the weekend finally arrived and the family gathering began. Everyone felt tense because those meetings always ended with arguments. Meanwhile, his little sister sat happily in the car because she did not care about any of that. The boy's father warned him not to cause trouble. Recently, those family gatherings had been making his father nervous, but Ryu reassured him and promised he would not start any fights. Besides Ryu being seen as weak and cowardly, his father also had a gentler personality, which caused the Zan family members to constantly look down on them. But this time, Ryu promised things would be different. The day before the gathering, he had been training in the gym while thinking about Ravenna. The two of them had made great progress, and he was already close to controlling his evasion ability completely. To fully master it, he needed to obtain the courage skill. That way he would stop instinctively running away. Back in his previous life when he played this character, he worked extremely hard to unlock courage because it made the character far stronger. He even mentioned that after obtaining the skill, the character became almost unbeatable. However, he knew progressing that quickly at the academy would be difficult because Ravena's physical strength was still very low. On top of that, there was another problem. The conditions for acquiring that skill were extremely difficult. First, Ryu needed a companion stronger than himself. Afterward, he had to face an opponent who emitted overwhelming pressure without receiving any outside help. But at the moment, Ravenna was his only partner, and she was still far too weak. The courage skill could be obtained through a small chance by dodging an opponent's attacks repeatedly, but failure meant death. In other words, it was an incredibly dangerous skill to obtain, though it would also unlock the full potential of his evasion ability. All he needed now was an opponent capable of releasing powerful pressure without actually wanting to kill him. He kept wondering who could fit those conditions until a brilliant idea suddenly crossed his mind because there was someone like that at the dojo. When they arrived at the family gathering, the driver opened the car door and everyone stepped outside. His little sister looked extremely happy because she loved these reunions. The protagonist's father asked whether his older brothers had already arrived, and one of the employees confirmed that they had. The protagonist's mother then asked about the family elders, and the employee explained that they were currently talking in the library. Our hero commented that staying inside a room all day would be boring. Because of that, he wanted to head to the training grounds. After saying goodbye to his parents, he planned to stay there with his little sister. He asked whether she wanted to go have fun there with him. The girl excitedly answered yes. Once he arrived at the training field, he noticed several advanced training dummies set up there. He told Yuna to stay somewhere safe and avoid getting involved in any fights. At that moment, he realized the training machines were surprisingly powerful. She noticed some of their cousins practicing nearby and said she wanted to join the training too. He warned his sister that it was dangerous, but just then someone appeared behind him and complained that he was late. When he turned around, he saw his bully cousin, Seung. At that moment, he became furious because this was the perfect chance to get revenge. Seung walked over to Yuna and asked what she was doing there. He was clearly trying to intimidate his little sister. Ryu approached him and said he was actually glad to see Seung. Sung immediately got irritated and demanded to know what he meant by that. Poor Yuna could only watch as her brother started arguing again. Ryu mocked his cousin, saying he had not been doing well thanks to a certain person, and added that he already knew Sung was the one who ordered the triplets to harass him. The boy grew angry, thinking his cousin had become way too bold. Sung had grown up in a very oppressive household. His father was strict and constantly pressured him to excel in training. Meanwhile, Ryu always received love and support from his father. Because of that, Sung developed deep jealousy toward his cousin since his own father barely cared about him. The two had trained together at the dojo since childhood. Ryu always defeated him, which made Sung miserable because he kept losing to someone considered one of the weakest members of the family. Still, Ryu was kind and always checked on his cousin afterward. Then one day, Sung realized he could strike Ryu from behind. He could not accept losing to him forever. So, acting cowardly and unfairly, he attacked Ryu from behind. Ryu crashed to the ground while Sung celebrated his victory. After that, he never stopped tormenting him. He knew that constantly beating Ryu would slowly destroy his confidence. Besides, hurting him became a way to vent his own frustration and envy. After every beating, Ryu would stay on the ground crying. That reaction was exactly what the bully wanted. From then on, the harassment only got worse both at school and at the academy. Sung thought he should have started doing that sooner, and every time they arrived at the dojo, he would threaten and intimidate Ryu again. Because of that, Ryu became even more timid over time. Back in the present, Sung was threatening Yuna again, but this time Ryu challenged him to a duel. "You think you're tough, right? Then fight me." Naturally, Sung became furious. Meanwhile, Ryu's parents arrived at the library and immediately noticed the tense atmosphere. His mother even complained about the smell of smoke. Her husband asked if she was okay. She answered that she was fine. He only asked because he knew she hated these family gatherings, since she was a commoner, and he had married her for love instead of status. Still, she smiled and told him not to worry about it. He thanked her for always trying so hard to make things work. Then he cast a protective bubble spell so she would not have to smell the smoke anymore. At that moment, his older brother appeared and called out to Sanji. That man was Sung's father, and he constantly picked on his younger brother Ryu's dad. The last time they spoke had been about Sung bullying Ryu. The man mocked Sanji, asking whether his son was traumatized from always getting beaten up. Ryu's mother had no idea her son was being bullied, and immediately demanded an explanation from her husband. But then she noticed how furious he looked. He even slapped his older brother's hand away. The man angrily asked what his little brother thought he was doing. Furious, Sanji said Sanji should talk directly to Ryu so the boys could settle things themselves. But the man scoffed, saying his nephew was too cowardly to handle anything alone. Just then, several relatives rushed in saying the young masters were fighting. The man laughed, assuming his son was beating Ryu again. He even mocked his younger brother, telling him not to interfere in a fight between children. The other relatives were already drinking and cheering for the match. He invited the couple to watch and joked that they should not cry when their son lost. However, Sanji replied that Ryu was not as weak as everyone thought. The man refused to believe it and kept laughing, convinced his son would crush him. Deep down, Sanji feared his son would suffer bullying again, but he was even more worried about his wife's anger after learning what had been happening at the academy. She truly had no idea about any of it. Furious, she demanded every detail later. Sanji arrived at the arena with red marks still visible on his cheeks from the slap he had received. When they got there, Sung was already using the lion iron whip technique. Lena cried out in fear for her son, but Ryu calmly took a defensive stance and blocked the attack. Right after that, Sung mocked him by calling him a scared little rabbit. But the attack had been weak, so Ryu countered with a kick straight to his cousin's stomach. At that moment, Sung realized his cousin was no longer weak. The kick was so strong it knocked the air out of him. Ryu laughed while mocking his cousin in return. Meanwhile, the family patriarch was taking a bath. He heard loud noises coming from outside, so he slowly stood up. Some servants informed him that the banquet was about to begin, though they hesitated to disturb him because a fight had broken out in the training hall. He asked which boys were fighting, and they answered that it was Ryu and Sung. The old man asked whether it was related to the bullying, since he already knew about their history. The servants explained that Ryu himself had challenged his cousin to the duel. That made the old man find the situation quite interesting, since Ryu was known for being weak and overly kind. The old man asked whether he could still catch the fight if he went there now. The servants answered that he probably could, so he began getting ready. He already assumed who the winner would be, but he still wanted to watch. After all, he would not miss the chance to see his grandsons fighting. Back at the dojo, the protagonist's mother was shocked. Not only had Ryu won, but he had completely humiliated his cousin. He even thought to himself that he had not done anything special. At that moment, a notification appeared saying one of his skills had leveled up. Wait, the fight ended that fast? Am I actually much stronger now? That jerk must be messing with me. They were the same age and had trained together at the dojo for years. However, after losing that first fight long ago, Ryu had become even more cowardly. Sung constantly encouraged the other cousins to mock him. In the original game story, Kang, the main protagonist, was supposed to defeat Sung. Afterward, the two of them would eventually become friends. But in this timeline, Ryu himself was the one who defeated his cousin. Still angry, he assumed Sung was only pretending to be furious, and said he would not stop there. He wanted to teach him an even harsher lesson, and started provoking him to get back up and continue fighting. "Come on, get up already. Wake up!" He poked the boy with his sword. Furious, he said he had not even done half of what he originally planned. Then he grabbed his cousin by the clothes and lifted him up. That was when he realized Shiuk had wet himself and mocked him for being so weak. Lena called out to Ryu in concern. At that moment, Hyuga's father arrived laughing, assuming his son had beaten Ryu again. What he did not expect was that his own son had lost and even wet his pants. Enraged, he demanded to know how Ryu dared to lay a hand on his son and shoved the protagonist. However, Sanji immediately started yelling at his older brother, and chaos quickly spread throughout the dojo. Even the protagonist thought he was doomed since he had started the whole mess. Sanji insisted his son had not cheated, but Hyuga's father claimed his child could never lose to a coward. Soon they all began accusing Ryu of fighting unfairly. The boy even turned to his mother and asked her to stop the argument. Instead, she was already fighting with his aunt, while his little sister bit the woman. The entire place turned into complete chaos. Worried, he scratched his head and wondered how he could stop everything. Then an overwhelming aura suddenly filled the room, making everyone freeze instantly. The boy immediately recognized that terrifying presence. His grandfather had arrived. The old man asked whether they were trying to disgrace the Zan family. His name was Vang, and he demanded to know what his sons were doing. The two men stood there awkwardly without answering. Then Suga's father claimed that Ryu had started the fight by challenging his son. But old Vang said he did not want to hear the story from him and instead walked over to ask his grandson directly what had happened. He wanted to know whether Ryu had truly started the fight. With an intimidating voice, the old man asked his grandson if he was the one who challenged Suge. Just the pressure from his grandfather's aura made Ryu's legs shake. His grandfather was far more frightening than he remembered. It felt like standing before a massive mountain. Trembling nervously, he admitted that he had started the fight and added that he had won fairly. His grandfather asked if it was true that he challenged Suge and defeated him. The boy answered yes and said the duel had been fair. He defeated his opponent without cheating. The family leader then ordered him to explain the battle in detail, and the boy described exactly how he defeated his cousin. He even suggested asking the relatives who had witnessed the match. Vang then asked why he grabbed his opponent after the fight, and Ryu explained that he thought Suge had died because he was not responding. In truth, he simply wanted to hit the bully even more. Still, Suga's parents accused the protagonist of acting dishonorably by attacking after the duel ended. However, old Vang only laughed and commented that his grandson was quite interesting. Suge and his wife asked the patriarch whether Ryu would be punished, but the old man refused, saying the match had been fair. He even told his son to ask Suga directly whether Ryu had cheated. The boy had only been pretending to be unconscious to avoid further humiliation. His grandfather ordered him to stand up, and he finally admitted that Ryu had not cheated, and that he simply lost because Ryu was stronger. The old man was somewhat cruel at that moment because he forced the boy to openly admit he lost for being weaker. Just seeing his cousin suffer that humiliation was satisfying enough for Ryu. Vang then asked his son Sungzio whether that settled the matter. The family apologized since they had falsely accused the protagonist. Now that everything had been resolved, the old man declared that he did not want to hear any more arguments. With that, the matter was officially closed, and he invited everyone to dinner. He wanted all his children and grandchildren to enjoy the banquet together. However, he stopped at the door and said he still had one more thing to announce. After dinner, he wanted to personally test Ryu's training abilities in a sparring match. With a smile, he said he was looking forward to it and would be waiting for him. The boy then rejoined his family and let out a deep breath in relief. However, he suddenly heard his mother calling his name. With a stern expression, she said she wanted to talk to him. Then she asked if he understood what he had done wrong. Nervously, he answered that it was because he fought Seong and dragged his parents into the conflict. She told him that was not the issue, and asked again, but he was terrified because it was the first time he had ever seen his mother this angry. He remembered his previous life when his mother constantly said she wished he had never been born. She repeated it many times and blamed him for her miserable life. Besides insulting him, she also treated him harshly. Because of that, he grew up believing his mother's suffering existed because of him. Sometimes she would hug him while crying and apologizing. He never knew whether she truly regretted her actions or simply felt guilty. Even so, he still loved her. One day she left after saying she had found a job in another city. After that, he never saw her again. His mother abandoned him when he was 10 years old. As he entered his teenage years, he became bitter because he had grown up without affection from either parent. Now in the present, he feared this mother would abandon him too. So he begged for forgiveness, and she once again asked if he knew what he had done wrong. Worried, he thought he should apologize for being born, but then his mother suddenly hugged him tightly. She said his real mistake was hiding the bullying from her because she could have protected him. She even apologized for failing to notice that her son had been suffering alone. Gently patting his head, she said it must have been painful for him to endure all of that by himself, and she asked him to promise never to hide those things from her again. He realized this mother was completely different from the one in his previous life. He could truly feel her love and affection, so he hugged her tightly and cried, promising he would not keep any more secrets. Yuna also started crying because she had become emotional. The two of them ended up embracing their mother together. The boy's father jokingly said he wanted a hug too, but Lena replied that she still had not forgiven him. While he awkwardly tried to hug his wife anyway, the protagonist noticed a message arriving on his phone. He immediately checked it. It was a photo from Ravena saying she had reached the top of the mountain and planned to train even harder. He felt happy seeing how seriously she was working and laughed while calling her adorable. The hero's parents quickly realized he was falling for that girl. At that moment, someone knocked on the family's room and called for branch leader Sanji. The servant informed them that the banquet would begin soon and asked all the children and their families to head to the hall. The atmosphere there was extremely tense. The same man also went to notify Seiko's family. A few minutes after dinner, the evaluation match would begin. The girl confidently said she was ready. Then the Sacred Sword family's grand banquet was shown. That clan carried a legacy spanning 200 years. Because of that, Ryu viewed the family as deeply traditional. Still, something else caught his attention. He noticed Song's family acting timid and realized they were afraid their grandfather was still angry because of the earlier incident. When the grandfather entered the hall, he struck his sword against the floor and demanded silence. He thanked all the relatives for attending, especially since even more family members had gathered this year. Since everyone had traveled a long distance, they were hungry. So the grandfather announced that everyone should eat first, and dinner was served. The food tasted incredible. After a massive uprising, the world had fallen into chaos. During that dark era, humanity longed for protectors, or rather sanctuaries. To maintain their power, noble families took on the role of protecting humanity. That was how the sanctuaries were established, with a single purpose. Hunters defended humanity from the monsters emerging through portals. They carried enormous responsibility, but also earned great prestige. Eventually, society developed systems to train hunters, but only the original 10 families, such as the Sword family, had enough influence to educate them through their dojos. Since the protagonist's grandparents were extremely powerful and influential, they founded the Dozin family. From a distance, the boy watched his grandfather greeting the other grandchildren. Without question, Seiko was his favorite granddaughter. She had already mastered the beast technique. The other relatives reacted in disbelief and questioned whether it was true. Ryu noticed that his cousin had become the center of attention, while the grandfather scolded his children for doubting her talent. If she continued improving at that pace, she would surely become the second strongest head of the family. The grandfather hoped she would grow into a powerful leader capable of surpassing him someday. Smiling confidently, Seiko promised to keep doing her best. It amazed him that she could stand beside their grandfather without showing fear. The boy thought she truly must be incredibly strong. At that moment, their eyes met, and he quickly became nervous while trying to hide it. The grandfather noticed the interaction and quietly laughed to himself. Then he mentioned that Seiko's growth reminded him of news involving a certain rogue. Ryu immediately understood that his grandfather was referring to the demonic duelist, an extremely powerful master, and also Kang's mentor, the protagonist of the game. Ryu recognized that character because he appeared early in the game's story. The demonic duelist had first taken interest in Kang while the boy was training at the orphanage. Once Kang left the orphanage at 17 years old, he immediately began training under that master. In the game's original story, there was also a chance for Ravenna to train alongside Kang, and he realized he had already changed that future. At this point in the story, the duelist had already chosen Kang as his disciple, though nobody there knew who the boy was yet. The old man already knew that the demonic duelist had accepted a student. Worse yet, they wanted a duel. Basically, the duelist intended to pit his disciple against one of the Zan family grandchildren. As soon as the grandfather announced it, the grandchildren became nervous. The old man said they could not refuse the challenge because it would damage the family's reputation. With confidence, he declared that he would show that shameless duelist the true strength of the Zan family. Seiko said she would do her best, and the other grandchildren also promised to try hard. Our protagonist stated that he would give it everything he had. Still, deep down, he was terrified of facing the game's protagonist, since that never happened in the original storyline. Someone suddenly slammed a hand against the table, and it was Shong announcing that he would exceed his grandfather's expectations just as his father had taught him. His father always told him that even a lion hunts a rabbit with full effort. Hearing that, our hero laughed quietly, knowing Shong would eventually get destroyed by Kang anyway. But the grandfather asked Ryu why he was laughing, and what he found amusing. The boy immediately became nervous while the old man kept insisting on an answer. In truth, he was laughing because he already knew the game's story and understood that Kang would completely overpower soon. Terrified of the grandfather, his father quickly made excuses, claiming his son was simply in a good mood. The old man stepped closer and questioned him again. He wanted to know exactly why Ryu laughed. "Yes, son, you're in trouble now." Ryu awkwardly explained that he had laughed because of what Sung's father said. He was not laughing at his grandfather. The old man ordered his grandson to explain himself clearly. A huge lion giving everything it had just to hunt a rabbit sounded strange to him. That was the reason he laughed. If a lion truly needed maximum effort, then the lion itself must be weak. By that logic, the lion was worthless, which made him laugh. But after noticing how serious his grandfather looked, he quickly apologized. To his surprise, the old man burst out laughing and admitted he had never considered it that way before. Resting a hand on his chin, Vung said he would think more about what his grandson had said. Everyone there realized the old man favored the boy and had high expectations for Ryu. Then the elder suddenly remembered something and told everyone to pay attention. He announced that they would hold training inside a portal that very day. Hearing that, the protagonist remembered his grandfather mentioning it earlier, though Sanji worried the children were not prepared. Another son asked about the portal's difficulty level. The old man replied that a white rank portal would be far too easy for the Zan family. That was why they would use a yellow key portal for the test. The portal had already been prepared, and the children stood outside beside their parents. The old man got ready to open it. He gave his grandchildren one final chance to refuse the training and leave. Then an intense light illuminated the entire area. A powerful wind blew from inside the magical portal. When he opened his eyes, he saw a beautiful landscape. Everyone had entered the dungeon. The grandfather explained that the mission was simple. As the status window showed, their strategy was to descend the cliff first. He pointed toward a nearby lake and explained that a rank 3 monster lived beneath the water there. He also mentioned sealing the creature inside the lake so it could not escape. That reassured the parents somewhat. Even Ryu admitted that fighting a rank 3 monster underwater would have been nearly impossible. However, the grandfather warned them not to underestimate the creature because it was still extremely dangerous. The boy already knew how powerful that monster was, which made him feel discouraged. Still, he could not give up because this would be a great chance to become stronger. He also understood that reaching the lake itself would not be easy since descending the mountain would be difficult enough already. Old Man Vang told them not to worry too much because the monsters along the way were not especially dangerous. At that moment, an employee arrived carrying a briefcase, making Ryu curious. Inside were camera collars the children would wear, so the adults could monitor everything in real time from above. There was also a portal watch. If they ended up in danger, they could call for help. The grandfather handed both items to his grandchildren and explained that the evaluation would last around 3 hours. Once they defeated the boss, they were supposed to unlock the portal with the key. Everyone was ready to begin the trial. Lena wished her son good luck and reminded him not to get hurt. Completely confident, the boy assured her that he would be fine and told her not to worry. Old Man Vang even celebrated, saying his 2 grandsons seemed to be getting along well, though that was far from the truth. The moment the signal was given, the test began, and the boys rushed toward the lake as quickly as possible. But our hero suddenly tripped and rolled down the slope. At the last second, he grabbed the rope again, then kicked off a rock and jumped farther down. After reaching a flatter section of the valley, he received a notification warning that a monster was nearby. Something suddenly caught his attention when a projectile flew toward his leg. Luckily, his evasion instinct activated, and when he looked up, he realized the attackers were rank 1 pouch monkeys. Those pouch monkeys specialized in throwing objects, and the creatures quickly prepared another barrage while the boy relied on his evasion skill to dodge everything. Since too many projectiles were flying at once, he also had to block with his sword. He soon realized the monsters were hurling rocks, so he swung his blade and sent one straight back at a monkey. That only made the others even angrier. As the rocks kept coming, Ryu knocked them away with increasing force. One of the small monkeys was finally slammed to the ground. Joking around, he said he had just hit a home run. The monkeys clearly had not expected that. After a while, he managed to defeat them all. He spent roughly 35 minutes fighting those creatures. Still, his real concern was the upcoming boss battle. At that moment, he noticed one monkey holding a fruit. Since he had played the game before, he recognized it as a vitality fruit. Excited, he immediately grabbed it. With a sly grin, he realized he could make great use of it. Meanwhile, the family members above were watching their children through the monitors. One relative started panicking because their child had been injured by a monster, and Lena immediately became worried as well. Shung's father bragged that his son was the strongest and would crush all the other grandchildren. The man was acting incredibly arrogant. Even the protagonist's parents were getting tired of his attitude. At the same time, Seiko was using her lightning techniques. It was the 5th form of the Beast King attack style, Lion Strike. Shung's father stared in shock, asking how his niece had already mastered techniques like that. The grandfather laughed proudly and praised Seiko's talent. Still, he was concerned because his grandchildren were burning through too much mana. By the time they reached the boss fight, they might already be exhausted. Shung's father confidently claimed his son would do fine, and told his father not to worry. Suddenly, a loud noise drew everyone's attention. The old man turned toward the screen and saw Ryu launching a monkey through the air. Everyone began wondering what the boy was doing. Senji and Lena became concerned, thinking their son was not taking the training seriously because he seemed to be fooling around. Down below, however, the boy was eating vitality fruits while commenting on how powerful their effects were. Watching carefully, the grandfather tried to figure out what his grandson was planning. Shung's father mocked Ryu again, claiming the boy was treating the training like a game and ignoring the grandfather's challenge. As they watched the screen, they saw him batting rocks away, and the old man quickly understood what Ryu was doing. He even commented that the boy had excellent instincts. Still trying to stir trouble, Shung's father pointed at the screen and complained that Ryu had even stopped to have a snack instead of training seriously. "Look at that, father," he went on, saying the boy clearly had no sense of danger if he could stop in the middle of the test just to eat fruit. In the background, Sanji grew irritated. However, old Vang told him to pay closer attention and asked whether he even recognized the fruit Ryu was eating. It was a stamina fruit that restored vitality. Vang even praised Senji, saying he had raised Ryu very well. Then he pointed at the screen for everyone to watch carefully. In truth, Ryu had been finding different fruits inside the monkeys, which was why he kept knocking them back. Rubbing his chin, the old man remarked that his grandson was clever in gathering the fruits to increase his strength. Meanwhile, Sanji tried to hide his confusion because he had never taught his son any of that. The hero only knew because he had already played the game before. After some time, he had eaten several different fruits, boosting his stats. The blue endurance fruit, however, tasted awful. As he kept moving, he gradually approached the lake. He had also collected so many fruits that he could barely carry them all. At that point, it looked like he could open a fruit stand with that amount. He realized escaping with all those fruits would be impossible because there were simply too many. He even considered hiding them inside the monkey's pouches. After thinking it over, he decided it was actually a great idea. So he cut off the furry pouch and stuffed all the fruits inside it. After removing the other pouches from the monkeys, he made several small bags and hung them across his body. With that done, he started jumping from branch to branch to get closer to the lake. He had wasted a lot of time gathering fruit, so now he needed to hurry. But then something suddenly caught his attention, and that is where the first part of the story ends. If you want the continuation soon, since there are still many chapters left, comment the secret phrase, "Reborn in the game." Whenever you leave a comment, YouTube recommends the video to more people. That is why your comments and support are very important. There are still many more chapters ahead. Very little was skipped in this recap, so if we reach 200 comments, the next part will come out next week. I will also recommend 2 more videos from the channel that you will probably enjoy, so click on them and I will see you there. That is all for now. Thanks for watching and see you later, everyone.